Aloha, guys. I am here with Devon Kikukawa, who is the office manager of the escrow company Title Guaranty here in Kona. And we are going to be talking about all the escrow processes and all the things that Devon does and her team. Devon, do you want to share a little bit about what it is that you guys do there in Kona? You guys just relocated to a really cool space, but for people to have a little bit of background of what you do and who you are, I would love to hear it from you.
Happy to. I'm Devon Kikukawa. I'm the Kona branch manager for Title Guaranty Escrow Services. We are the oldest title and escrow company in the state. We handle real estate escrow transactions primarily for sales, but also for refinance transactions. So we basically do the paperwork and the money handling that takes you from the point where you execute a contract to actually consummate and close your sale or purchase. Same thing for lenders. We help them when they're handling a refinance transaction. So we do things like pay off mortgages, handle the delivery of proceeds, and make sure the documents needed to finalize your transaction are in place.
That's a lot. you guys, you guys do so much, and I think that on the client side, when they say, "Oh, yeah, I'm with escrow," like they don't have a full understanding of how many tasks you handle for a transaction to get to the finish line. So today we're going to be talking about that. Devin, is escrow required for all real estate transactions here in Hawaii?
Although we'd like to think that we're going to be used for the majority of the transactions that go through the state, it is not technically a requirement. If you are comfortable with the person you're dealing with, people do work with attorneys to transfer properties directly between a buyer and seller, or more commonly, family members will often just work with a real estate attorney to handle the transfers. So there are some instances where you're not going to use a title and escrow company, but for the majority of the time where you don't know the person that you're selling or buying your property to or from, you're typically going to want a neutral third party. And even if you do have real estate attorneys, oftentimes they will encourage you to come through a title or escrow company to do the research, because the liability for handling a transfer between unknown parties and the exchange of funds, and also the type of research that we do, actually serves those attorneys, even in the instances where they're going to handle them. They will say, "Hey, can you go get a title report so we can at least base our documents off of that?" And most attorneys will kind of shy away of handling the transfer of funds in a real estate transaction, because, again, of the liability involved. So yes, it's possible, but the standard for most typical sales transactions, they do come through a title and escrow company. It's just outside the realm of expertise for a lot of the other real estate professionals to handle it without engaging a title and escrow company.
I love that you said that because we have heard our share of horror stories of deals that go wrong, of people trusting
Unfortunately,
people, right?
yeah.
And so,
And it's not necessarily intentional either. It's just a lack of knowledge of the things to look out for that are specific to the state. We see this a lot with investors, if they're trying to break into the Hawaii market and they say, "Hey, well, this is what we kind of do in California, or this is what we do in the state that we're coming from." But you have to remember, reporting requirements are different state by state. And even attorneys that are handling family transfers, if they're unaware of certain items, that can result in issues, even in a friendly transfer, which can typically be amended if you're still in touch with the parties that you're dealing with.
mhm.
But in the event of a death, or if you lose touch with the parties that you were initially dealing with, not having the type of research that a title company does can kind of put you in a position where you're struggling to find a resolution to something that could have been resolved if you came through a title and escrow company initially.
Right. Well, I think the moral of the story is just to always engage. to try your best to always engage with a neutral party so that you don't get into hiccups. I've had a situation where a gentleman called. This was a lot over in Ocean View, and it was basically a very simple transfer. And the gentleman found out so many issues on their lot, and this was a very simple $50,000 transaction that he didn't think much of it. But because this was a handshake kind of a deal, and they just handle their paperwork on their own, and he potentially might have gotten a discount, he uncovered a lot of things on this lot after the fact. So, to say the least, always engage, try your best. And now you have Devon as a great resource. Devon, who usually opens escrow?
Well, that really depends. Majority of the time, the agents will open the transaction. Which agent opens it kind of depends on what's happening with the contract. Usually, the first agent to have the fully executed copy will be the agent to open escrow. So, if your buyer makes an offer that's immediately accepted, the listing agent may have that fully executed contract first. So, we'll see their request to open while that fully executed contract is delivered to your buyer's agent. If there's a counter offer, then maybe the buyer's agent will have that fully executed copy and be ready to open prior. So typically it is the real estate agent. And they will most likely have a suggestion on who to work with. Now, who chooses the escrow company? If you're listing a property, most listing agents will go to somebody they have a relationship with and have the report done ahead of time.
Mhm.
There's no requirement to work with the title and escrow company that the listing agent initially works with. However, it may save you some time because if they've engaged with the company prior to, they may have done some background work to speed things along. However, you do have the opportunity in your contract to negotiate who you're going to send your escrow requests to, and you can also specially request specific title insurer. There may be limitations on which company can do your insurance policy depending on what happened previously in the property. So that might also be something to consider when you're choosing your title and escrow company is who can insure on the property or who's done the work or how quickly do you need that property to close. Um, like I said, just because somebody is working with our company first doesn't mean the buyer may not request to go to another company. But again, it's always a good conversation to have because if there are known issues that one company has the answer to that another doesn't, you may just save yourself time with going with the initial lead. But again, if your title is clean, then almost all the companies that do what we do can do the insurance policy for you. So if you have a preference of a specific company or escrow officer, you do have the opportunity to make that decision while you're negotiating the contract.
So well said, Devin. I think it also depends on who the escrow officer is, right?
Mhm.
They're the drivers of the research, the transaction. And, I think that comes with local knowledge, right? And on the side of the agents, right? If they have had, opportunities to work with multiple, they're able to guide the client. But you said a really interesting thing that does pop up to where if the property is not insured by the selection of, say, for example, you are negotiating a contract, there is a prelim on the pre-listing file. You get this prelim, but you prefer to work with another title company. Number one, you need to make sure that the title is insured by this escrow company, right? So
Correct.
yeah, so that is super important. Now that we're prefacing on the opening of things, what is the main function of escrow for people that are watching?
The main function of escrow in particular is we're a neutral third party that holds your documents and the funds to ensure that all contractual items that we're responsible for are made good on before the consummation of the deal. Now, we have a few different functions in terms of what we do to get you to the point where you sign off and close your transactions. But if you really break it down, the primary function of escrow is we're just like a safety deposit box, right? We hold your closing documents, we make sure the documents are good, the money is good, so that when you sign a deed to somebody you don't know, you have something that says, "Don't worry, I have their money in file." So you can sign the deed and move on with your day. And if something does go wrong, then you don't risk having given away a property prior to knowing that you're going to get paid for it. And for a buyer, you know you're depositing funds and that the deed you're going to get is executed and safely held so that when you deliver that money or when we deliver that money on your behalf,
Hmm.
you know that you actually get the property you're looking for. We are liable for instances of fraud. That's one of the things title insurance
Hmm.
covers. So we go through extensive measures to make sure that we are engaging the correct people as part of the title insurance policy that's being issued. That is one of the items that they insure over, that the person that's signing the deed over to you is the correct party to be signing it. So there is a large laundry list that can change depending on what's going on in your transaction. But at its core, escrow is just your safety deposit box for both sides, so that you can move forward without having the nervousness of wondering, like, okay, if I give you this money or if I sign this
Right.
document, am I really going to get what I'm asking for out of it per the contract that we signed?
Right. And yeah, and that's why it pays off to have an escrow company handle all these items for the buyer and the seller. Okay, so it's game time, Devin, and you have received the fully executed purchase contract. What happens from by the time you receive that email to close? And there's so many things, right? So many people touch the file, and but in your processes, what happens when that once that email comes through?
Okay, so what people don't realize is the contracts that we're given are basically an outline for everything that we do in your transaction. So there are two big documents that kind of dictate how the escrow transaction are going to go. The first being the purchase contract. The purchase contract outlines the timelines that we follow, when and what monies are due at certain points. They also dictate the inspections that your agents are doing with you, and kind of depending on how those steps go, dictate kind of how our timeline as your escrow company goes. But on our side, while you're out there inspecting the property, what we're doing is we're collecting your deposits. We're contacting homeowners associations. We're ordering your title report. And that title report is the second big document that affects how smoothly your transaction is going to go. Your title report will reveal if there are liens or judgments against the property or against your seller. And per most of the contracts we receive, with some minor exceptions, we're going to go off, we're going to request payoffs for your mortgages, we're going to request account balances for homeowners associations, any special assessments that we're finding are due. If there are liens and judgments against your seller, we make sure those get addressed prior to closing, based off of the terms of the contracts provided. If there are changes to title that need to be addressed, those are things that we also look at, discuss with the seller, figure out a game plan to resolve. And again, that's all outlined in how the contract dictates what we're supposed to do for the clients. And then again, we do work typically with sellers to clear off items, to address any unknowns that we may not have been made privy to prior to, or changes that weren't addressed prior to opening escrow. The other nice thing about working with a company ahead of time is that you can get that report and start to address any changes that need to be noted in the public record ahead of opening your escrow transaction. And then once all of that information is gathered, we prepare statements, we order the deeds for the transactions, we work with lenders to get the loan documents in, your loan figures balanced, provide the balance due to close and the timeline for depositing those funds to your buyer, arrange for signings with the seller. There are other parties depending on the transaction type that we'll work with, but basically it's just getting the story of your transaction is outlined in
Mhm.
your contract into a financial statement, and then getting everyone to execute the documents to consummate your real estate transaction.
And every single transaction is not the same. Right.
Mhm.
And things do change during the opening of the escrow, right? And so getting
Absolutely.
any amendments, getting any changes into the escrow is imperative so that you guys can get the full picture on what's happening and what needs to be done in order to
Absolutely.
fulfill the contract, right? Um,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Because all
now,
kinds, as you know, all kinds of things happen during real estate transactions.
oh
That
boy.
initial inspection may send you in an entirely different direction.
Yes,
A change or a lien or judgment against the property may delay things. Everything might be super clean, and we may want to move up the closing date depending on what's going on. If your loan process takes longer, right? There are a million different small, tiny little things that can change a transaction in a small way or in a huge way. So getting the most up to date information, having a full copy of the contract is imperative for us to do our job for you correctly. So having really good communication between the agents, your lender, the clients, and your escrow team is a major crux of any transaction. And if that communication isn't there, there are 101 things that can go wrong in any one transaction. So
or
yeah,
support not
escrow
answering.
is like it's a changing process, just like the discovery of what's going on in a property is, right? We evolve as much as the clients evolve as they're learning more and more about a property. Yeah.
So I think one of the smallest hiccups sometimes people that don't answer, right? Clients, agents that are just like not answering. You're like, okay, I need this. That could be a common thing that could stall an escrow. Now, speaking about now that we have very much touched on the processes, the cost of things. How does your company outlines who is in charge of what, and the cost of getting, the title insurance and escrow fees?
So there is a standard real estate contract, right? And there is actually a portion of the contract that outlines who is responsible for what closing costs. However, just like with anything else in any other purchase contract, you have the opportunity to negotiate who pays
Correct.
for what closing costs. But generally, all the closing costs are disclosed to you when you're making an offer, and that's what we follow. Um, in the closing cost section of the purchase contract, there are also instructions for what happens if there's a special assessment against the property. Most contracts outline that seller has to pay off any back due taxes, any mortgages, any liens or judgments against the property. Now, there are some exceptions, like the standard residential contract and the commercial contract do have, small adjustments in them about who's responsible for what. I have seen contracts where buyers negotiate that, hey, seller's going to pay for everything, buyer's going to pay for everything. Again, it all of what we do and how we split up the fees involved come from the instructions that we get in the contract, and that's actually the standard for escrow. We're a neutral third party. We don't actually make decisions on who's responsible
Mhm.
for what. If there is any question or if there's something unexpected, what we do is we go and say, hey, we go talk to your agents and say, this has come up. I don't see this particular issue addressed. You guys need to tell us, per the agreements between the buyer and seller, and in writing, preferably in the form of an addendum or amendment to the contract, how is this going to be handled? So if there is something undisclosed, we don't just decide who's going to be responsible for it. It always
Right.
comes from your contract, which is also why we rely heavily on the communication with the agents. If there's something unknown, we need instructions
Mhm.
from the parties involved on how this is going to be handled and in order to move forward with your
Right.
transaction. Yeah, absolutely.
Again, beautifully said. Right? You cannot, it needs to be more straightforward. And like you said, you cannot be making decisions on people. Say they call you and they're like, well, why am I paying this? And like, okay, go back to your contract or clarify with your agent, right? You cannot, you're kind of like in the middle of
Yeah,
just making
absolutely.
sure, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And also for our fees, I just wanted to let you
yes,
know we have
yes,
our website is actually really awesome. Highly suggest
it
anybody who's
is.
looking into getting into real estate to check out tghawaii.com.
Yeah.
We have all of our fees are actually published. So you can look, and if you're thinking about making an offer and it's a weekend or the middle of the night and one of us is not here and you're like, what are my title and escrow fees going to be? Because we deal with your title fees, your escrow fees, and they're based on your sales price. We actually have all of our rates published, so you can go and get an idea of what the title and escrow fees are going to be. We also do collect things like recording fees, attorney document preparation fees, and we do have a resource where you can build an estimate based off of your basic contract items directly on our website in the event that somebody's not available to do that for you. Um, so that's one thing that I found, and I've tried to peruse some other sites, and that's something I do really like about our company. We make it very easily accessible for anybody who wants to take a peek, along with a few other resources that may make going through the real estate transaction a little bit more palatable or digestible for somebody who's not super familiar with the terms that we deal with, or like the options you're going to have to choose from when you're actually in escrow. So.
I love that. And all the resources that you guys provide are amazing. For agents on our side, I mean, we're able to like create beautiful net sheets for sellers, and then there's also other buyer features that you guys have added that I have personally enjoyed. But yeah, thank you so much for highlighting the website and for sharing more information about the fees. Now, the question I think that I get asked the most: how fast can we close? that is that is the
Well,
number one
that
question.
again, that's totally dependent on what's going on your transaction. If you
Right.
have a cash transaction, there are no inspections required. You know for sure you're going to want to buy this property. If you've done your title report and you know everything's clean, if everybody is ready to sign the day after we open, we've closed transactions as quickly as, within a week, 5 business days. Now, that's not common. Most people want at least a little bit of time after making their initial offer to do some sort of inspection. So I would say a typical transaction timeline would be 3 to 4 weeks for a cash transaction,
Hmm.
and then 30 to 45 days for a loan transaction. Have I seen cash transactions go longer? Absolutely. Have I seen loan transactions close in a shorter amount of time? Absolutely. But also, I've seen both of these, extend to 60 days. I mean, I've seen transactions that are open for a year.
Yeah.
So it really, again, depends on what's involved in your contract, how prepared everybody is to actually move forward, what kind of research has been done prior to opening your transaction. But I would say a standard cash, again, is anywhere from 3 weeks to 30 days, and a standard loan transaction would be 30 to 45 days to close.
Right. And of course, you have those like exactly what you mentioned, where there's very little contingencies. Everybody's ready to sign, and everybody's trying to hurry up because they want to spend Christmas in the property. We so I guess for those are like the a week and a half, right, closings to where
Yeah.
are, but it's not common, right? And exactly what you mentioned, we have to make sure that the contract gets fulfilled with all the contingencies to take you safely to the finish line. Um, what are the most common problems that transpire in an escrow? What are the things that you've seen that you have helped people troubleshoot that happen to be the most common issues?
So I would say, so on like a very customer based level, we'll have people come here. So this is a very Hawaii specific problem. So if we have out of state buyers coming to the state and they haven't checked with their bank or made arrangements to send funds,
Yes.
because of the difference of financial institutions that we have here in Hawaii, we have encountered, not all banks, but there are a lot of financial institutions that will not allow them to wire funds in the amount that they need or in the timeline that they need to close. So that's a big one for people traveling to the state. to inspect properties as a buyer. Just make sure you've made arrangements with your banks before you get here. You know what you need to do to send the amount of funds you need to send prior to leaving. I mean, I think technology is progressing and there are more and more financial institutions that will have an online option, but it's not true for every single one. So that's a big one to address. Another kind of customer based issue is you didn't expect to come into escrow right when you did and you have a trip out of the country planned. Now, it's not impossible to close if you're not in the country, but there are other um, items that you need to be aware of, like how are you going to notarize your documents? A seller with one deed, probably not as problematic, but a buyer getting a loan where you're going to have 150 pages of paperwork to sign and 8 of them need to be notarized, like that can become really problematic
Mhm.
if you also don't have the access to technology. There are remote online signings that can be done, but whether or not the lender will accept that kind of signature is a whole nother issue. So again, there are these workarounds, but um, funds and travel are kind of the biggest customer based issues that we see. Now, as far as kind of the minutia of what we do, then there are like a million different things that can go wrong, right? If you didn't get your title report done, and we find out that you got your property from your uncle, but the roadway interest wasn't included, which is what we call lack of access. So that's like a big thing when we're talking about issues that we see for people who go through an attorney who may not be familiar with the specific requirements of a certain subdivision. We'll see the legal access drop from a deed, right? Meaning, hey, you have this property, but the legal right to travel over these privately owned roadways did not appear and was not granted when you got this property from your uncle or your grandfather. So those kinds of things happen. um, whether or not the paperwork or the loan process can be completed in the amount of time given in the contract, whether it's because there is an issue on the appraisal or whether or not the appraiser can even get to the property at the correct time, or there's a bunch of little things that can happen that are outside of just the basic physical where the humans involved located kind of a situation, and that can be a million different things, right? A survey can go to the property and you find out your roof line is built completely into the neighboring lot and they're not going to allow for that when you want to get a loan, and you have
Correct.
to negotiate a deal with your neighbors to sign an agreement.
And hope that
So
they're
there can
home.
be, yeah, and hope they're home, hope that they're even going to answer your phone calls and that they're not beefing with the current owners right now, right? There's all kinds of like little things that can happen in a transaction, but typically it'll just be undisclosed information or just information that parties weren't aware of if you're talking outside of the basic logistics of your buyers and sellers moving money or getting documents moved around.
Right. I think you hit the top list of issues that do pop up, that sometimes buyers and sellers do not expect until they are in the transaction. Speaking briefly on, you mentioned that people are able to transact while they're not in the country. It brings its sets of challenges, right? But in essence, is it possible for people to do that? Um,
Yeah. So another benefit of the COVID real estate boom and people being more isolated was the push for the acceptance of what we call a RON, or remote online notary.
mhm,
So if you fit certain parameters and you have the technology, there is actually a way to do your transaction completely electronically. Is it the right option for every customer? No, it does require a little bit of tech savvy. And if your client or if you're struggling with certain electronic formats, then it probably will be more stressful to do than not. So that is an option if you're traveling. But if you cannot meet those requirements or if the loan doesn't allow for that, then you're in a situation where you either have to go to a US embassy or consulate
yeah.
to get the notary done, or if you are in a country which is part of the Hague Convention, they have another type of notary called an apostille, which is basically an authentication process for foreign notaries for documents to be used in the United States. So the execution is one part of the things to consider, but the second part of that is delivery of your original documents. Now, most countries, even if you overnight a package back to Hawaii, you're talking 3 to 5 business days if
Right.
you're lucky and your documents don't get stopped in customs.
Mm-hmm.
So it is possible, but there are delivery timelines you need to consider when you're in another country, and especially if you're traveling between countries, because a lot of people that we work with, I do work with quite a bit of foreign clients, and
Mm-hmm.
if they're living there, that's one thing, right? But if you're traveling
Traveling.
during the process, you may only be in one country for a week and in another country the next, so that even more so becomes a challenge, and whether or not you have access to a decent printer becomes another challenge. um, we like to get scanned copies of documents in this case ahead of time, because there are really minor things that people don't realize become a big issue here in
Mm-hmm.
Hawaii,
Mm-hmm.
that we can address if we can review the documents before waiting that 1 week for them to get shipped back. So
Right.
it is entirely possible. We do work with foreign clientele actually fairly regularly,
Mm-hmm.
but there are timeline matters to consider, and it's always a good idea at the get go, even when you're executing your contract, to talk to whoever you're expecting to work with in escrow. Let them know where you're going to be, and then they can kind of preface you on what's available in the area, how long they think they're going to need to get documents delivered. We can talk to your clients about what kind of resources they have access to and what they're comfortable using to kind of dictate what would be a smart timeline to try to accomplish your transaction in, yeah, without stressing everyone out. Yeah.
I think the best advice for people that are in this situation. I think preparing for this moment is just so important. To set expectations for also for both sides, right? For the buyers to have awareness that the seller is off island, out of the country, and vice versa, and perhaps timelines can, like you mentioned, be adjusted better to meet people's timelines. Now, what is another thing that does pop up during escrow is an escrow holdback. For people that are unfamiliar to what that is, do you mind sharing what an escrow holdback is?
So, as much as we'd like to think that every real estate transaction is going to be a pretty package where everything's done exactly when it's supposed to be done, there are escrow holdbacks. So, what an escrow holdback would say, hey, like this was supposed to happen prior to closing, but for whatever reason, it's just not possible. A surveyor can't be scheduled in time. A repair that was supposed to be completed wasn't completed, but everybody still needs the transaction to close. So basically, it's saying, hey, something wasn't done, but we want to close the deal because of X, Y, and Z reason. There's no room for extension. It's something minor. Seller needs the proceeds to move on with their life and buy something else. Um, Something wasn't done as far as a repair goes to the satisfaction of the parties involved, or there just wasn't an opportunity to address something that came up. You know, unfortunately, sometimes that happens like a week prior to the scheduled closing date, a pipe will burst, or
Yeah.
something happens on the property that no one expects. A tree can fall down and damage a roof line, and everyone's ready to close. But this one item needs to be addressed. So an escrow holdback is an agreement between a seller and a buyer to withhold funds, typically from a seller, for something to be accomplished in a set amount of time. We have agreements that we require to be signed prior to the closing of escrow if you're going to ask us to do that. We
Mhm.
cannot hold funds in a file because somebody is unhappy with it and they just want us to. It has to be, again, a signed agreement between all the parties involved, buyer and seller primarily. We give it to the agents as a just for, I mean, we have the agent sign off on it, but the primary customers is your buyer and seller.
Mhm.
So we make them sign the agreement, it has to be very clear outline terms on the release of funds, how long we're going to hold on funds. And if that doesn't happen in that timeline, who gets the money, right? So,
Correct.
say a good example of this would be the termite treatment or termite inspection results in treatment being recommended, but the fumigation company can't come for 3 months after
Mhm.
closing because they're completely booked. That's probably the most common one I've seen
Yeah.
lately. So they'll say, hey, we want to hold back the cost for the termite treatment. And if the treatment doesn't happen in that time frame, the buyer will get the money and then they can go and get the termite treatment done directly with the termite company. So we'll say, okay, we're going to have everyone sign this agreement. You have the 3 months that they told you it's going to take them to get out there. If we get the invoice and the confirmation the treatment was done, we'll send the money. We'll give everybody a copy of the certificate received if they didn't get it directly, and then we'll call it a day. If it doesn't happen, buyer gets the money. At the ending of that 3 month period, we release the funds to the buyer. The buyer can then go and engage a treatment company, and that's the end of that, right? So basically, an escrow holdback, although it's not ideal, it does happen. And it's
Right.
basically to allow you to close a transaction, even if there are a few small items that need to be addressed after the fact. When you're talking about an escrow holdback, you just always have to be aware that if there is a lender involved, because of their restrictions on what buyer has to contribute to any purchase, a lender should also be involved in the negotiation of a holdback, because first of all, repairs are a really sensitive issue depending on what kind of loan you're getting, and whether or not a buyer is allowed to get funds from a seller for an item that is not done after closing is something you have to discuss with the lender. Because if they're required to pay X amount down towards the purchase of that property, and that um, transfer of funds to the buyer after closing um, brings that amount that they're bringing in down, that may not be allowable for a lender. So again, it's something we offer, but there are a lot of different things you have to consider more specifically with a loan transaction. And there are paperwork and agreements that need to be negotiated and signed by all parties prior to the close of escrow, if you do want us to hold back funds.
Right. I think you touched on a very, very important part, which is the lender approval of this escrow holdback, right? People may say, well, I'm just going to do this at the very end, and, but they have to still run this through the lender if they're utilizing financing. So that's great that you added that on as well. Um, so like everything, every single transaction is not cookie cuttered, and not everybody gets a super clean title report. Um, what are the causes that could potentially stall an escrow? And in part, there's also the taking of title for the buyers, right? Once they're wanting to proceed with the purchase of the property. Um, so briefly touching on those two-part question.
Okay, so for items that would be revealed on a title report that may affect your timeline, so there are two court systems that we deal with for recording of real estate transactions. And regular system is a little bit less strict and typically just involves notifying or making public record any changes. The other big one is land court, and there are some properties that are dual system. If you're dual system property, then you are beholden to the requirements of land court. And any changes, so if somebody that you own the property with has passed away, if there's been a change of trustee, they actually have a document requirement to file a petition to note these changes to provide the evidence. They have to be reviewed, they have to be filed, accepted, and then we can move forward with updating the report and going forward with the transfer of the property. That can be a very timely process depending on how busy they are, because I believe there's only like two clerks that review these documents for the entire
Mm-hmm.
state. It may take 2 weeks, it may take 3 weeks, it may take a month after the document's been executed and the petition's been submitted to hear back from them, and they might not even accept it on your first attempt to submit it. So that's a really time sensitive matter that if you haven't had your title report done, if you hadn't had the opportunity to file that petition prior to opening, that may affect your
Mm-hmm.
timeline for closing. undisclosed liens or judgments against the seller, or because sometimes things get recorded and people
Yeah.
aren't aware that it's going to affect the transaction, but it may pop up on your title report. So if we need to go through processes to get the payoffs for those items in, that may, depending on what's going on, affect your timeline to close. Now, for title and tenancy, I don't, if you're really familiar with real estate transaction, a buyer has the opportunity to decide when there's multiple parties how they're going to hold title. We call it title and tenancy, or your vesting option.
Mhm.
Now you can hold title under your name individually as a single owner. If you have multiple owners, there are actually different types of ways you can hold title to the property depending on what your plans are for that property. We always recommend that you talk to a attorney or tax
Yes.
professional when deciding on how you're going to hold title to the property,
Mhm.
because how you hold title may affect like your estate planning. It may affect your tax reporting depending on how much of the property you own. You can also place title under a trust name or an entity, such as a limited liability company, a corporation, a partnership, nonprofit. So all of that are things that the buyer needs to instruct us on how they want to move forward. And that's another thing, that we have resources available on our website
Mhm.
that may not answer all of your questions, but it's typically enough to kind of get you started on how you want to hold title, especially if it's just going to be under your name, you and your spouse's name, or you and your business partner's name. And again, that's on tghawaii.com. There's some great little posters that have flow charts to help you make that decision. We also have a
Right.
couple of videos, but again, we do always recommend that you talk to your estate planning attorney. Would probably be the best option to go with for advice, or if you have a CPA, they may have some input, especially for investment purposes, on how to hold title.
Right. I think that is one of the most common question that you guys may get when they have those vesting options, those vesting
Mhm.
documents, right? What should I do? And they need to speak with a lawyer or a CPA, correct, to in order
Mhm.
to have a better understanding of those
Yeah,
options.
absolutely. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, like I said, if you're like, I'm just going to own the property, it's just going to be me. That's a really simple, like, you don't really have a bunch of choices at that point, right?
Right.
But anytime you have multiple parties that are going to own the property together, as much as we would love to have all the answers for you,
Yeah.
unless you're gonna, there's a lot going on in someone's life that might need to be taken into consideration. And I know people, when they're making a big financial purchase, such as the purchase of real estate, they kind of shy away, like, oh, I don't want to talk to an attorney, it's going to cost extra. But I mean, really, that little bit of advice can save you so much in the long run on making sure you don't run into any other issues from not getting the appropriate advice from somebody who really knows what's going on in your life and can really help you with that. Like I said, a lot of people, especially if it's the primary residence purchase, like, there may not be as many items that would complicate your decision. But again, it would be worthwhile, especially if you're making an investment this large, to get advice from somebody who can really talk to you about the delicacies of how you're going to hold title.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the recommended advice always. Now, for people that is their first time transacting, specifically first time home buyers, the concern that I hear all the time is, what if there's delinquencies in the property? I do not want to inherit bad taxes, and and so I defer to escrow, to you guys, to explain how that goes. But do you mind sharing for the people that are very new, this is their first transaction, and there's fear that they inherit bad taxes?
Yeah. So one of the lovely things about working with a real estate professional, a
Hmm.
brokerage, real estate agent, is that they have these contracts that really cover all of these items. Again, we are bound to the instructions we're given on what you want us to do as part of your transaction, but your
Right.
standard contract does call out that the escrow company will address and pay any back due taxes, and will pay off any mortgages, will pay off any liens or judgments affecting the property. So all of that is actually inlaid into your contract. So the County of Hawaii Real Property Tax Office are some of the nicest people you can ever talk to, and you can talk to them. Unfortunately, the website is not always current as of today's most recent information. So one of the things we do, like say for county taxes, is we will reach out to the counties directly and say, hey, what is the current status? Were payments made? If they weren't made, we will gather the balance due through your closing date, which may or may not be listed on their tax website, and we pay them out of the seller's proceeds. And then per the contract, we prorate them, meaning we calculate the amount that the buyer is responsible for from the date of closing through whatever period we're working to close in.
Right.
So seller is made whole. They only pay what they're due up until the exact closing date. Buyer refunds them off of the base amount. Buyer is not responsible for reimbursing them for penalties and interest accrued for not making payments in time. So we do address unpaid taxes. We address mortgages that need to be paid off as part of your standard contract. Now, if you choose to try to go off on your own and you don't have a real estate professional designing that contract for you and saying,
Mm-hmm.
hey, look out for this, we want to make sure this is taken care of, then you are at the mercy of whatever you decide to put in your contract, and whatever a buyer and seller end up negotiating, which can be a multitude of things, right? So I have seen contracts come in where they say buyer is going to pay for everything. We're giving them a killer deal on the sales price for the property. So they're going to pay all the back due taxes. They're going to pay all of the back due homeowners association dues. But in your standard real estate contract, you have your real estate agent looking out for you, and
Correct.
they say, hey, you're already going to pay X, Y, and Z for this property. The seller needs to go out and pay for anything that they owe on this property that they accumulated prior to us purchasing it from them. Yeah.
And you know what? Now that you're sharing that story, very rarely do sellers tack on their back taxes on the buyers, right? I mean, they just take it out of the proceeds, and yeah, it is like not common practice unless you've seen. No.
It's not. I mean, I have, like I said, in
Yeah.
the few instances are if they're coming in really far under market,
Yeah. Of course.
and the seller's like, I already know that I have all this stuff I have to pay, and I just want X amount of money to hit my pocket at the ending of the transaction, and they're going to pay for everything else. But
Right.
again, like that kind of gets a little scary because they may say,
Yes.
"Oh, I know I owe X amount, right?"
Yeah.
But if that was the last statement they got a year
Right.
ago, there may
Right.
be a bunch of penalty and interest added to that. So most agents will not recommend that you go that route, right? They'll say, "Hey,
No.
we're going to offer you what we think is a fair offer for this property, and if
Exactly.
a seller needs to pay off all these items, then that's what they have to deal with." So,
Right.
luckily, our market's been pretty healthy. So we haven't had a lot of transactions where there's not enough proceeds to cover these items. But, depending on where your market is in real estate, that's another thing to consider. And another thing, working with an agent who's going to get you an estimate prior to accepting an offer is really beneficial because that's what they're working on with you when they negotiate your contract, right? Your art is this going to satisfy what you need to be happy at the close of the ending of this deal. So yeah, it's
Right.
not common. It has happened, but it's not the standard.
No, no, not at all. On my side, when I'm going through buyers that this is their first time, sometimes even the contractor, like, what I want to make sure, even though it is inlaid in the contractor's contingencies that do talk about the clearings of these items, and and so I said, you know what, just call escrow just to triple check. If they're not really trusty of what is in writing, but yeah, I thank you so much, Devin, for providing so much guidance and so much knowledge to the people that are watching this video. So your Title Guarantee, Kona branch,
Now
beautiful
we have to
site.
do Plaza. Yeah.
Yes. Now your new office, it's in a great location. I mean, you guys have always been centrally located, but this one I really like because there is a lot of parking spaces. It's
Yes.
more spacious, and there's also more shopping options where you guys are at now. And so it's cooler in my opinion.
I agree. We were at the Walleye Center for many years, and in the last, gosh, it's only been about a month or so, we moved to the Copico Plaza. We're in
Yeah.
between West Side Wines and a barbershop that's next door. And we're in the Kopiko Plaza is the complex just below Long's on Kopiko Street.
Yeah.
I love the new location. It was a really nice kind of fresh start for us. And you're right, the parking is infinitely better. It's much easier to find our office, and we're much more visible in the new space. I've noticed we have a lot more agents just coming through and saying hi, which I
Yes.
think is actually really nice. So we're here. If you have questions, you guys can stop by. We do tend to get a little busy, so give us a heads up if you're coming, but we're more than happy to stop and talk to you. There's myself, Winona Garcia, Michelle Pagarigan in the office as your escrow officers, and we have a team that also supports us. And then there's Rhett Thomas, who supports the real estate agents in their needs for marketing and sales and different little resources that we can do. We love talking to your clients, and we also like talking to agents and providing educational resources for you. So if there is a topic that you need, communicate to myself or Rhett, and we'd love to go out and meet with both you as the real estate professionals and then the buyers and sellers as your clients. If you guys are looking at purchasing real estate, or if you want to talk to us about the process, we're more than happy to do that.
Beautiful, Devin. Thank you so much, and I'm wishing you so much success in your new location. And looking forward for any buyers and sellers that are watching this video to engage in services with you and your company. And I thank you so much for being such a great resource today. I really appreciate
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Molly.
it. All right, my friend. So now we say aloha.
Aloha.